Hello, hi, everybody, and welcome to Portal Stargate, broadcasting from Aquarian Media. Theresa will tell you where she's broadcasting from. We record these shows and then we upload it to about 15 different locations, maybe more. And Theresa, say hi, and where are you going to broadcast the episode when we're done recording it? Part of this
Well,
is live.
it looks like Facebook is choosing our groups for us right now. So I'm in
Ex-
the process. It says resuming destination, open Facebook group settings. So whatever live stream allows in our groupings, it says go to news feed. So I'll put that. Looks like on TJ Morris.
Right, so you do
On
that
TJ
back
Morris, and
end.
then the UFO Secret Space.
Right. Okay.
And
Let's do that back end. Let's have that as part of the show. Okay. So last time we ended with this White Sands UFO visit that Teresa had when you were 8 years old. But that's not right math. Is that? Yeah. Anyway, 1959, I think. Yeah, you were born 51. Okay. So the math is correct. Anything you want to add about your White Sands UFO visit? Sometimes when you do an episode, then it sparks your memories, and you get more downloads or information, or your mind fills in the blanks. Was there anything else that you want to add about this
well, I'm
episode?
sure there's plenty we could add because people don't really, I'm not even sure I understand all of it, but it was a willing to go there. And where did that thought come from? If it wasn't from my past life experience and out of body near death experience, and then seeing those beings from somewhere. So I believe we should add that we're all striving for the same thing, and that is evolution. And so with me, Janet, this this what we're doing, that was a very important part of my life, but I'm only now willing to talk about it because it was not acceptable.
Right.
And in 2023, I feel like enough people are not going to think we're totally neurotic or psychotic or wishful thinking. It's just the way it is. So a lot of us are going to be those that are pro and those that are against, for or against. And I know that different people have different types of experiences, but the White Sands for me was enjoyable experience. And you even touched on that, how you and I have a more of a ascension evolution feeling or an evolvement, that these beings are like us. So uh, I think this is a good starting point for these portal Stargate avatars and talking about our souls, why we're evolving in these human bodies. And it's a lot like the movie Avatar. If people would just stop and think about from the time we're born to the time we pass. So,
I think
however,
let me interject here. I think what happens when we have these experiences is we're bringing who we are as a soul. So I was just reading over Betty and Barney Hill. Barney was terrified and he had a negative experience. Betty was joking with the aliens. They were cracking jokes. So there you have two different, distinct, different personalities, and a lot of your personalities. Now, where does your personality come from? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it what you bring to the table from past lives, from other simultaneous or previous existences? So I think that's why you and I are generally positive people. No matter what's going on, we still laugh, right? We still say, okay, this is a cosmic joke. I mean, you can't control everything. And then some people internalize and they get so destabilized and paranoid and upset about every little thing. So that's why I also say be careful who you select as your therapist or your hypnotherapist or whatever, your peers, your counselors, because everybody influences us, and we can get this information can go real light or real dark. So I'm very selective about even who I bring on my show. I'm not wanting to go into the dark side of the force. I'm more Star Trek rather than Star Wars. My whole general philosophy. And
well,
some
this
people hate that. They don't like that. You're too positive. was like, oh, you're too negative. So
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
let me explain this to you, Janet, that this is very serious what we're doing, because
Yes.
this today, okay, I go to the senior center and I'm sitting there, and a friend of ours, which you haven't met in person, but he's a friend of mine. And so we play games at the senior center. And he says, "Oh, I saw you on Janet's show, and I saw several of them." And I said, "Oh," he said, "Yeah, the one with, where you talked about your experience at White Sands." But Janet, I was like, "Oh, I didn't know anybody I knew was going to see this." So I didn't know how to feel. I was like, "Oh my God, this is smacking me right in the face, Janet, where, this is in my reality. It's not just in my head in my past lives. It's how are people going to feel about me telling my truth?" He said, "This seems like that this is people with very spectacular life experiences, but he said it some other way. I don't remember exactly how, but
Mm-hmm.
it's shocking because what we're doing, people will find us and either be like us or want to know more about it, or maybe it'll be the way of the future. Maybe it is part of what we're supposed to be doing now. I the rest of my story will be about the evolution of my life and how I wanted to use psychic reality, and why I felt like I was training psychics, and why I went to Hawaii. And, my whole quest with the Navy was to
Mm-hmm.
find out more about these beings. I mean, talking about how it affected me, saying it for real is, this is my reality now. And it's not going to go away because it's forever and ever. Somewhere, somebody will have a copy of this. And you and I
Great.
know, seen the Betty Barney Hill and Stanton Friedman stories and all the people that did Roswell. So everybody has a piece. Nobody, everybody's coming out. It's just in different waves. And I worked with, I was introduced to Dolores Cannon, and they wanted her to help me regress. And Dr. Laura Sturgis took me back regression, but nothing was bad. I don't have anything bad.
Great.
So
Well,
mine's always positive.
you have to really admire the early people who came out like in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, here it is 2023, almost 2024. The year goes fast. And, we're finally having hearings at Congress about the UAPs, UFOs, and what is it? Unidentified, anomalous. Uh, it doesn't mean
Phenomena.
phenomena. It doesn't mean aerial anymore. It means anomalous
Well,
phenomena.
it
That's a
depends on the faction or the government agency, but
Mhm.
that's the difference between ET, extraterrestrial, and EVANS, extra biological
We'll go
entities.
into that. Yeah, we're
The
going to
names
stick
and
we're going to stick on this episode, getting our episodes out. But we're going to do shows on extraterrestrials, on different species.
a
We
lot
were
of
talking about doing an
stories.
Ascension show, out of body, remote viewing, ghosts, paranormal. There's all kinds of. You and I have had so many experiences in all of these different factions that we'll eventually go over these, and then we'll put a lot of this information in our various books that we publish. Some will be me and us
The
together,
books.
independent, but we're collaborating because for me, why I do this is I'm hoping to create awareness and awaken the population because these technologies exist. They're these aliens who are working with a lot of us actively in our secret military, secret government. They have the cures for all diseases. They can stop aging. We can basically become physically immortal. We can solve all of our fossil fuel problems and have energy systems that can literally take us to the other side of the universe. Factions of our, not the ETs, our secret space program, the world, the Earthlings are already doing this. And so, in a way, this lie is hurting everybody because we already have these cures and we already have these solutions, So we need disclosure, and so I don't. That's why I do this. I'm not sure what your motivation is. I'm not about money, fame. I mean, I'm shy, basically. It's like, but I realized when I got into this, being an experiencer, that I had to pick up the baton, so to speak. I had to pick up the mic. I had to stand up in front of audiences. I had to get over my stage fright. I had to get over my fear of talking about all this. Um, so yeah, I hear you. I understand that now you're going to start getting the feedback from your peers. But at a certain point, I had to say, I don't really care because I'm about getting this information out. And I don't care who believes me or doesn't believe me. This is my story, but what's happened since I started on this path in the 1950s, I started having experiences when I was born, but I started coming out in the 60s and 70s and 80s by going to the science fiction community because they were talking about the potentials, and I went to Star Trek. But when this started to come out, then more people start to come out. So the more we come out, the more people come out, and that's why the Hills were in '61, and it's 2023, and 60, 70 years later, now we're able to speak. But how many people have had these experiences and they're dead, and they didn't get to speak their personal truth while they were alive? It's really sad because humanity could be so much further along than we are now, and anyway, I really applaud you and anybody else out there that comes out of the closet. This is the biggest closet of it all. We have the GLBTQ closet. This is the UFO experiencer closet. And I'm here for you. I support you. We'll have our contact information. You can go to my main site is Dragon at the End of Time. I'll explain what that means. Dragon at the End of Time.com.
That's your blog, right?
That's my main site right now. I'm working on Aquarian Media, but I'm switching from Aquarian Radio because we're doing media now. We're doing audio visual. And then TJ will tell us which, she's got to pick a site to develop. But whenever you want to let us know, we'll put that in the comments. But, and there's your phone.
Yeah, I have to take this, so keep talking.
Okay, so
I'll mute for a second.
Okay, I'm gonna switch to the next slide. So we were both shocked as children about the early space program. So I said to my parents, my brother and sister, when I saw all these ships that were being launched, and the show I was watching back in, it was probably 58 or 59, I think it was before 1960, these ships were crashing, and I was just devastated because I knew that we were in space. I had been in space, and I said to my parents, "What? We're not in space yet?" Those were my words, and they said, "No, honey, that's science fiction. We're trying, but we're still." I think Sputnik may have gotten up, and we were still trying, or maybe Sputnik wasn't even up yet. Anyway, are you off the phone now, Theresa?
I am, and I agree with you that we had to grow up in a time watching all these shows, and most of the people our age watched Twilight Zone, and gosh, what were some of the others that we used to talk about? And we grew up with Isaac Asimov and Heinlein, and then Star Trek came along, and was that 68 or 69, I think.
Star Trek came along in '66. I was 12 years old. I was so excited. And that was our introduction to an intelligent alien that was actually second in command. So anyway, we're going to go over this another time because right now we're focused on Theresa. So Theresa, you're going to come back and interview me. And I actually have some of those episodes that I did. I have some further slides. But this is a very important episode. I know Theresa's story. We've talked about it over and over on just audio platforms. But now we're doing, face to this stuff. Now we have the old faces. Too bad we didn't do this 20 years ago. We were still young. But anyway, it's okay. We are who we are, and we're fine being who we are. Better above ground than below. So tell us about this episode that you had. And then I'll, when you're done, let me know you're done, and then I'm going to ask another question.
Okay. Well,
your necklace.
Janet's included this the knife twirling, and my memoirs is I have a story to tell that is about out of body near death experiences and how that led me on a spiritual journey and a quest forward. But these have to do with the men in black that followed me throughout my life. And they were at my football games. I twirled the fire like this girl here. Now, these knives are some that came later on where they'd hook them, and I've seen them used in Hawaii. But we, I used machetes, just like you have a knife handle on one and a long piece, just one piece, like you see the green ones in the military, just chopping or a
Yeah, if
chopper.
you could send me a picture of the type you used, because I was looking
It's
for pictures and I couldn't find
That's
twirl
fine.
and
This gets the point across. It's not that important. So
right.
the point was that uh, apparently they didn't, I don't guess they knew, but see, this is what we're going to, as I tell this story, it brings up all these questions on my spiritual journey or my quest. So the reason I went to spiritual science over the long haul was there was no, thank you, Brenda. Okay, get baby. That was a dog that came in. All right. My sister just came in from the beach, her and Brenda and Jim Thomas from Texas. Anyway, the reason this was important was the quest for me was to find out who are these beings that are overpowering and embodying other existences that seem to have, they were always smarter than me and that always show up during traumatic times in my life. But this time, men showed up in 3D form and they were always seemed to be working for the government. So one of the girls that went to the high school where I went, it was James Madison High School, Southwest Houston, is yeah, that was our marching band, and there was Victor Banks. I married the one on the left, Stephen Lee Parrish. If you look to the, that's oh, you found a marker, aren't you?
Yeah, is that the right? Is that you in this the
Yeah,
band? Is that the right picture? Because um, Brenda
that's
told me which one was you, and then
yeah.
that's you in the
The
group
dark
photo.
skinned one. Yeah, I had very, look how dark my skin is and my hair, very black skin, dark
Huh?
brown skin, and dark black hair. And even in, that's my high school picture right there. It says Ginger Thurman. They even misspelled Thurman, Thurmand. But the reason I was in the Houston Spinnerets, besides this, you've got Spinneret up there. So I was in a group
Is
of
that the right spelling?
yes, it's
Oh, good.
just I was a spinneret, and that's not my high school group though. That's but you're showing the Marlins. We were the James Madison Marlins, and back then I was twirling, and some gentlemen came to watch our football game. But one girl brought me up to said, my dad wants to meet you," and so he met me and said, "How would you like to work for the government?" I was like, "What?" He said, "We're always looking for people with talent and skills." So he had decided to recruit me based on these twirling knives and fire batons, which I didn't understand. But he said that I had a skill with both my hands, ambidextrous, and he wanted to see if those machetes were real. So when I brought them up, I kept them super sharp, just as a teenage girl. My mother would just not watch because I would throw them up, twirl and twirl them behind my back and throw them up in the air and twist around and catch them behind my back or under my arm or under my leg. And they were super sharp. So go
What
ahead.
was what made you want to keep them super sharp? Did you want to cut your head off or something? I
People are
mean,
always saying they were rubber in high school or the football team's giving us a bad time, but it wasn't
oh,
even my idea. A little girl named Sherry had started before Sherry Hardesty and Sherry Manning. There was Nella Abel, Sherry Manning, Sherry Hardesty, and me. But we had another girl, and she trained us, and she had brought machetes. So she wanted us twirling machetes when she trained our group for the high school. And
mhm.
then she disappeared. I don't know where she went. So we were on our own. So we did it. We twirled fire batons and we twirled machetes, all of us. But I guess I had a certain neck, or I was the tallest, or the one that stood out. I don't know. I don't know if I never talked to the girls and asked them if anybody else talked to them, but apparently not. And then when I was in the Houston Spinnerets, that we met Sonny and Cher, and oh my gosh, so many people that were coming in. Bob Hope, of course. Bing Crosby, Frank Gorshin, Nancy Ames, all these people coming in at the airport, and we would meet them with our batons holding overhead. And I remember Cher bringing her mother. I got to speak to her mother and Cher and Sonny Bono. And I later talked to Sonny Bono later on in life, which was nice. So I was always a follower of Cher. But the point was that they apparently were always looking for talent.
Mm-hmm.
And the Men in Black stayed in my life forever to this day. So
Let me ask you a question on that. Do you think that part of why you never got hurt and why you were able to catch that was that you had psychic abilities or some kind of
I had a
telekinesis?
talent. I did. And I thought everybody did. And of course, when we practiced, we all were very impressed with each other. But I had a talent to catch sharp things and not cut myself.
Right.
And that was a talent. But
Did
apparently,
some of
it
the
was
girls get
a
cut? Did some of the girls get
I
cut?
don't know. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. But I just know that that was a memory that stuck in my head because I was recruited out of the by this
Right.
girl's
Well,
father.
when I think of all the things to do in life, that's the last thing I would think of ever wanting to do is to twirl knives up, and you twirled them pretty high up in the air, right? And,
12
and,
fire
and when you
batons.
turned around and you had to catch these things before they sliced your arm off or your head off, and it's like, no, that's like, to me, that's insanity. But you did it with great confidence, and but I
It
think that's
was, I guess, in a
why
way.
I wanted to talk to you. Like, I mean, wait, you call him a Men in Black. What makes you think that this guy in the audience had called
Well,
you all
I
names
don't know
and
that he was a man in black, but he was a government. He was what in the back of a government agent, or he worked. He told me he was. He said he worked for the government, and he was a recruiter for the government, and that there's a lot of people that would love to use my talent and skills. So uh, and then later on, they came back and took me under the bleachers another time, and another guy came, so bought me a hot dog and all that. There was two times, and then about the time when they approached us again at the at the James Bond show. So
we'll cover that later.
I
We've
don't.
got a
Yeah,
slide on that. So you're saying that they came back and met you
yeah.
under the pictures. What was their agenda? Did
Uh,
they
to make
scream?
sure that I was wanted to work for the government, that I was just going sure. I mean, wasn't like I was being asked to do anything else. Later
Uh-huh.
on, some girls came to ask me to work for American Airlines,
Uh-huh.
but
They were actively recruiting, and part of it was because you could twirl knives and fire, which was an indication to these government people of a certain talent.
I
But
guess because
yeah,
he'd said the fire was impressive, and but the sharp knives he didn't. He thought they were rubber, and I remember him saying he thought they were rubber. But we got kidded a lot, like, oh, those are dull. So that's and one of them was one of the girls had a dull one. I think her dad made her dull them or something. But then
uh-huh.
after that, I made sure I would take a stone and sharpen mine. So it was an important
Okay.
part of my life.
So here I was trying to find one without the ad, but that's okay.
The
Follow your
clearance papers, follow your dreams. That's just something
yeah.
I say.
This is your now you're in the that's Navy, right?
Yes,
Yes. Because
second
there's
time.
so do you have an earlier one?
I don't
What
have
did you
it. I don't have my pictures of that. I don't even remember pictures of that one. That was the one that the woman said, "What did they do to you? You don't remember painting this mural at Orlando, and you don't remember being here." She says, "I even had your platoon. You were the platoon leader." And I said, "No." She says, "What did they do
okay,
to
so
you?"
let's back up a couple steps here. So this guy wanted you to join the military, and you ended up joining the military. What year did you join the military? And what branch?
May 10th, 1967, Office of Personnel Management. And it was through NASA, also had my papers. I had to refill those out within 4 or 5 years later at NASA. So NASA had them in
What
1960.
branch of the military were you in 67?
I was OPM, Office Personnel Management, Government, GS.
What was that?
I,
Excuse
I,
my ignorance. Was that part of Army, Navy, Air Force?
I was joined. I was in a Special Access Program, SAP. I was a SAP.
You were a SAP.
uh, a Special Access Program, but also Joint Chief of Staff could utilize me. But usually the Air Force was involved and the Navy, as well as I worked with the Army and Marines. I was assigned all Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. The only machine I went to the Coast Guards in Alabama. Well, let's see, was it Alabama? Yeah, I think so. Georgia. But I didn't have to wear the uniform. So all I had to do was go over to the buildings and go like look at the little Coast Guard ships, or I don't even know what they were called in boats. But at the same time, I have no intelligence on Coast Guard work. I was strictly mostly used Navy in uniform, and Navy active duty, Navy and reserve. Army, I was active duty and Marines. And when I got out, the CIA had sent a lady over to get my paperwork in Hawaii, and I'd been working as a corpsman for Kaneohe on the other
Mhm.
side with the Marines. I think it was 13 Recon or something like that. But
So you have two times that you went in. So you
yeah,
were in from what year? From 67 to what year?
uh, I May 10th, 1967 to May 10th, 2017 is 50 years. But the second time I went in was 4/29/85. But they had me on record with Tom coming in 1980. So I was 80 to 93. So there's 13-year period there. So I think it was May 1st, 1988.
So sometimes you're not even aware you're still in the program.
Well,
Or even
I signed contracts. And
you
then yes, I did. And then they had me sign again when I went to the Army, and I had to take an ASVAB, I guess a third time, or at least a second time. But and they had all the U.S. Treasury. I had all the tests at MEPS in Houston. But when I went to Fort Hood in '94, after leaving Hawaii and going on that mission and meeting Dolores Cannon, they had me sign a new contract at Fort Hood, 3 Corps, Army 3 Corps. And Crosby Saint had just been over there, and so had, well, it doesn't matter. But anyway, there was a Army, Air Force over when I was in Hawaii, and then I worked in Navy SINCPAC fleet, and then I worked with the Seabees over there. And then I did at the JAG office, I worked at Great Lakes. That was 5 months and 8 days. They
so let
did
me,
that.
let me ask you, let me break it down. Okay. So so you were wearing a Navy uniform and you're saying you didn't have to wear the uniform, but this time you did. Was it what uniforms have you worn?
All of them except Coast Guard, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines.
So how did you know which uniform to wear and when?
That's what I was assigned. When I got assigned TDY, or like when I went to Lowry Air Force Base, I wore Air Force. When I
Okay.
went when I went to Shafter,
So
Fort
they
Shafter,
gave you the different uniforms to wear.
yeah, I'm assigned. You get so many pair.
Uh-huh.
And back then, the Navy was dungarees and blue jeans and dungarees. They were like the old Navy, and then we had white. But we got dress blues. Like that's on in that picture is a dress blue. Yeah.
That's dress blues. Okay.
Yeah. And we did that in boot camp. That was done in Orlando. That
So
was taken.
you were on various assignments in different places. I have a very little exposure to the military. I was a civilian working for the
You're a
military.
contractor. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a contractor. Went
That's what
to
I do now.
Johnson Atoll, and I'm a civilian. But everywhere, everybody was military, and they had Army, Navy, Air Force, and then there was a period that was a joint operation. They had Russians because they were disposing of chemical weapons. So they had different
Ordnance.
nations come in try to figure out how we could do this safely without polluting the world, because it was, you saw recently how that train fell over and released all that toxic. What was that, in Pennsylvania? No, Ohio, right? Leaking into
Hazmat.
Pennsylvania. So yeah, so we were always fearful of having some kind of explosion or episode. So we had to have a gas mask at our side, or at our bedside, bed table, and you had like this
Yeah, I
minutes.
just had training in the military.
Right. Well, I'm talking about being on a location where they're decomposing chemical weapons, and some of them were so toxic that if they got into the air and they got to you, you could be dead in minutes or seconds or something. So you had a like an EpiPen type thing that you could stab yourself in the leg, and then you had to get to the JOC building, which had reverse atmosphere. So the air, as you opened the door, the air went out. So you wouldn't be, as you opened the door, you had a special door you had to go into if there was a spill or a release of toxins in the air, and the air went out instead of in. So you went in there, and then you went through a chemical wash. It was like a cattle paddle thing with gates or channels that you went through until you got through all the washes before they let you go back into the rest of the building with the general population. So they were really concerned about um, toxic spills and air
Well, you were
pollution.
there as GS. Or no, you were there in contract,
I was
uh,
just a contractor.
working for someone that had the contract at Johnson Atoll through probably the U.S. Navy. Is that what you understood? You saw more Navy
I,
than
I
or
it was
was
pretty much. I dated a young man from the army. We would do mock battles, mock invasions. We would time the planes coming in from Honolulu, how long it took.
hmm,
And I knew it took 8 minutes to go 800 miles because I personally was in the office when we timed it. And we'd say, I didn't operate the radio, but the girl said, on your mark. And she used all the lingo, right? You're overhead now. That was 8 minutes and 2 seconds. So they tried once a month we had these mock battles. And so when you left the office to go home, and there were people that got killed in battle, so to speak, right? So they were saying we got invaded by enemy forces, and so they would, divide our military up in a couple of different uniforms, and they would use those uh, what we call paint guns, right? So you get shot and you're mortally wounded, and so we weren't allowed to disturb anybody who got killed. And so their punishment was like they're out in the hot sun all day, right? I was like, damn. And so you had to just walk around and or drive your bike around, and you couldn't say hi or hi Joe. You
well,
couldn't.
wasn't Johnson Atoll where they dumped hazardous waste, or is that
No,
just
they they
misnomer?
brought them from in containers from all over the world, and they had them in different locations, and they would pull them in. We weren't allowed over to the plant. It was a big plant. We were not a civilian unless you worked there. They did hire civilians, but if you worked in the plant, you were making six digits. That was
Yeah.
the minimum, was six digits.
Well, I
So
worked
lucky,
around hazmat, but I delivered hazmat, when I was doing big
right?
trucks. But that was all kept separate at Area 51 up there, in Nevada area, all separate then. And I guess you didn't work close to that because now you were in a building that were a librarian, which you and I wound up from early age working in libraries and school and around libraries and spent a lot of time. So I think the education and being around books has a lot to do with it as well, because we were
Also, it was an isolated
library.
location, and they had me off doing a second job. So they often have a primary job where that's your listed job, but I ended up being pulled to go to the underground installation with extraterrestrials, which will go into future shows. Now, what I wanted to know, because we're dealing with you this time, and then we'll deal with me another time, is that during these various assignments you had, we've listened to people like Stuart Squirtlow and other people that worked on bases. And they often were, in an office, and two doors down was an alien or a reptilian or something. Did you ever have the periods in your life where you were aware of an extraterrestrial presence in any of your offices? And if so, did you have any interactions with them?
Well, you mentioned Stuart Swerdlow, which in the past history of our radio shows, we discussed underground in, there was a base off of Long Island, Montauk Point at one time. And I was taken there and I got very sick. And there were men in white jackets. But yeah, I was taken down there psychically. But I don't know if they were experimenting. I don't have enough intel on it in my mind. Uh, you and I tried to look at that, and we interviewed quite a few people, including those friends of Stuart Swerdlow, Peter Moon, his real name, and then what was it with author
Preston Nichols, Duncan
Preston
Campbell.
Nichols. We interviewed him.
Yeah, we
We were
talked to
trying
him.
to get to the bottom of what women were doing because they were big on saying men only and that are young boys, and we
Mhm.
couldn't confirm or deny that. So the only part I could confirm was I was very aware of Grumman there, and my husband's father worked for Grumman. And Ken Johnston, he was a pilot. He worked with us, Ken Johnston. So we've done a lot with him. But when I was in '68, we had already had the Apollo missions out of NASA, and my
Right.
husband, that boy that was in that picture in the band, Stephen Lee Parrish, he was alive, and I married him and had 4 children with him. But he
Uh-huh.
worked at NASA, and his father worked. So, to answer your question, when we went to Long Island, Montauk, I had an experience there, and it was a psychic experience, and I could feel. I don't know. They took me to the doctor over it, and they decided I was pregnant again.
Oh.
So I don't know if I was then or not in '68, but that's what they said. So I had Lauren I had Angela March 25th, 1968. So it was after her, but it was before Lauren Michelle Parrish, April
Mhm.
3rd, 1970. Okay, so 68 to 70, sometime in that time, since Steve's parents had moved to Long Island for him to work out there under Grumman's contract from NASA because the Apollo missions, people were losing their jobs, etc.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
when
they
I
were
was
taking
up
people
there
jobs.
and I went on base, they, the husband and father that are no longer alive, took me to a place that I was asked to go to. I guess that's why they had me coming up there.
Mhm.
And I went underground, and that's when I saw a big cement wall, real thick, 8 foot to
Right.
12 feet thick, and then this thick glass, and I would say two beings of another place where I was exposed to psychically, like J. Allen Hynek and
Mhm.
uh, who was that gentleman down in Louisiana? Jesse Marcel. It was
Mhm.
that energy, that same feeling of working with beings from another place in space.
Well, that's an interesting. Let me interject a couple things here. Okay, first of all, I remember feelings. I'll go back to that. They often let you have memories, but then when I say they, either the military or the aliens, they repress memories. And so, but for me, I find that they don't stay repressed. It might take years, but they seep up and they
They
come
do.
to the surface. And then it's
If
like,
you work on yourself, yeah, really,
yeah,
really work on it, you can find those pieces. I think
right.
gradually, or they want you to. So maybe it's a gradual education as
Mhm.
a Terran or as a biological entity.
Right. So they may, when it's time, they release the information. Okay, now you can remember that. It's too dangerous for you to remember it, at that time. So there's all kinds of theories as to why information comes back to you. And then often when I get information, there's usually corroborating information from somebody else that's had the same. Me too. That happened to me too. So we
Well,
have
that's
these.
a key word you said. The Me Too generation with the 20 and back program are those that worked in space, or those that worked in the Space Force or Secret Space Force, or the what we have with the UFO business, UFO secret space. stories, and those key words, will trigger things for some people.
Why we ended up interviewing people in the first place is that we were supposed to remember things. And then when all of us got together and started remembering things, when I interview somebody, I go, well, that never happened. And then other times, like, wow, that, spot on. That happened. So I think we're supposed to wake up and get conscious and remember a lot of these memories because, there's something happening here. And I hope it happens in our lifetime. I know we're in our 60s and 70s now. But, theoretically, we could live to be hundreds of thousands of years because there's a faction of humanity, the hybrids, that are not limited to this life expectancy that we have of supposedly 120 years. So that was the. Oh, here we go. Bread is popping.
You want to change film?
No, we're still fine. Yeah. So anyway, there was a second part, and I forgot what I said. Anyway, it'll come back.
Well, the clearance papers changed. Clearance is really based on a need-to-know basis and what project you're assigned on. So a lot of people get TDY, which I did too, and Men in Black stories come to mind.
TDY? What'd you say, TDY?
Yeah, temporary duty stations. Okay. TDY is a term, like an acronym.
Temporary duty.
That's all it means, temporary duty.
Oh, D-U-T-Y, temporary duty. Okay.
Anyway, temporary duty is just temporary duty, like orders, and you'll get them cut. And I always had extra temporary duty. So did Tom. Steve was already dead by the time Steve died, and I married Jerry Orr, and then I became Philip Pavelka's wife in the Navy, chief, and then I became Thomas Morris's wife. But it was when I was with Jerry Orr that brought me over to meet Dolores Cannon, which he was like a GS-11 working on 13. So he was a GS. And then Tom was special sergeant, but he was CIA. And that's when he worked for Ronald Reagan, and worked with U.S. Secret Service. And I met President Reagan and President Bush in Houston. So this is before I got married to all these men, is when I was still being briefed on, did I want to work for the government? So this was one of their recruitment tools.
So we're going to go back in time. I think I have and if I have this time frame wrong, correct me, and I can fix the slide for future presentation. But
you do better than I do.
I say, well, okay, what movies were playing in '66? So I looked it up. I go, okay, it was Thunderball. So Theresa, you went to the movies, and when you came out, here's the Men in Black. Here we go. Oops.
They were Men in Black.
These are the mysterious Men in Black, and lots of people talk about them. There was a couple of movies about it. And
why did they contact us? Well, I have already had experiences with extraterrestrials. It was a known fact, through the church, through the hospital, through the school, and now through NASA, because my husband was telling them how psychic I was and how I believed in UFOs, because I'd had an experience, death and dying. And I did, the way I met my husband was my psychic abilities. Stephen, in the band, trumpet player, but we both played trumpet. But he and I went to see this movie. He and I both liked James Bond. And on the top of his bed, when I met him, I was very impressed because he had all of Ian Fleming's books, and Heinlein and Asimov. And I was like, whoa, I never read them, but I was impressed just the same. So that's why I said, oh, there's a movie coming. You want me to take you to one? So I don't know what I was doing in his room at that time. We'd been going steady a year, but we never did it, in his house. So, but just for the record, I did wind up marrying him. And so, but yeah, James Bond was a key factor for the men to bring us out the side of the theater, two in front, two in back. And after the movie was over, we were rushed out to the side of the building. And that's when a Men in Black, and in my research through my quest to find out how all these men in black and aliens and extraterrestrials all work together on the planet and off planet and with our government and with people like me and you and all these UFO people that are in our association is the fact that those, first of all, you have to not be in fear of, usually, and secondly have an interest in intelligence and how the world works and the reality of the cosmos. So we were there watching a movie like this,
That's,
and that's how we got recruited. Go ahead.
I mean, just I want to say it's very important to not be afraid, and it's hard to control your emotions. But the more you can meet them, extraterrestrials or the men in black or whatever you're dealing with, like fearless or at least not freaking out, the further you get. But if you come in and you do freak out, and that's what Whitley Strieber talked about in one of his books, Communion or something. He learned how to be not afraid when the extraterrestrials came, and he eventually was able to meditate, sit down in lotus and meditate across from them. So here you have these men approaching you, and they're strange, and some people might have been afraid, like who are these people? But you were fearless. You've always been kind of fearless.
Well, yeah, I guess I would twirl fire and sharp knives as a teenager. I was, but I always felt like I had these psychic abilities
Hmm.
and that I could feel when they were coming, or we'd watch clouds, when I was a child, and I felt like, people say, "Can you bring them down?" And I said, "Well, I never tried, but in Hawaii I could." So apparently there was a way to, like your Dr. Stephen Greer, all his stuff after Jalen Hynek's, you know, contact levels we have, CE 1 through 5, and he's taken over teaching people how to, communicate.
Well, that's something we hadn't covered. Is that so? You were able to. I was able to pull them down when I was a kid, and I would have all summer long. We slept out. We were always asking the folks, "Can we sleep out on this porch? Can we?" And so we would coordinate it with like we got older the boys, and they would set up a tent in a certain yard, and behind all of our houses, it was like Queens, New York, but it's called Avalon. There were alleyways, so the cops patrolled the main street, so you didn't want to get busted being out after curfew, but you could sneak down the alleyways. So we would go to each other's backyards, and there was often the time we just sat there, and I'd say, okay, we're gonna look at the stars, and we would pull things down and see things. Now, I wasn't able to pull anything down to land in the backyard, but we had a lot of. Well, I don't know that. See, that's the other thing. If you do pull them down to land in the backyard, they could blank you out, so you don't remember it. So, tell me a little bit about your pulling things in. When did you realize you could contact and pull them down? How old were you? And what
Uh,
happened?
well, when I was in second grade, after I died and had, of course, you and I did it as a child in my cribs because they
Right.
entertained me, and I remember watching them. So I always felt like I was watched anyway, or in contact,
So,
or that was my family, but just have it staring you in your face. So I just knew they were always there, and I'd watch them out the windows. And you've had that on one of our shows. So
right.
I knew that they existed. I just never didn't think they didn't exist. And then Sputnik came over, and I was trying to explain that. And then the second grade, when the orbs would come up, and I couldn't walk after hepatitis, and I died, and they'd come and pick me up and stand me up, and I'd come out of I was so weak. I was like anemic from hepatitis, and I'd fall down and I'd pass out. They'd pick me up, stand me up, and then they'd go off like Glinda in Wizard of Oz. So I just assumed those. But I tell you, the time that makes sense is when I was living. We were putting man on the moon in NASA, right? But my husband was working at night, and so was everybody around with Grumman and TRW. They had contracts, and the first time I saw a spacecraft that I could know it was separate from orbs, or like the kind that do crop circles. They look different. And that was when the bright gold light came down, and the man said, "I want to have a baby with you." Right. And then he split and left. And I followed out, and all it was a big bright light. So,
Right.
so my whole life.
Yeah, we got over that episode. Um, so that's going to be the future show. So you were home alone, and
Yeah.
you got a was it a knock on the door?
Yeah. He came to the door and knocked on the door and just looked in my eyes and said he wanted to have a baby with me. And I was mesmerized. And then the next thing I knew, he was leaving, and boom. So,
No, right. Yeah, so they can do that. I mean, I
it's
want to deal with
amazing.
that. I call those love bites. Well, that's not a love bite. That's they
I
can
was
totally hypnotize
mesmerized.
you, mesmerize. You're mesmered. You're hypnotized. You can't move. You can't resist. They
No,
say, "I want to make a baby with you." You're
that's
there.
so funny.
You're down for the count,
I
and
was, I was
the
mesmerized.
act is done. And then you're going. And I've had this happen. You go, "Oh man, am I pregnant now?" Oh, they have super sperm or something. It's like, they want you pregnant. You're pregnant. Now they may not. You may not carry the child, right? They might. I always said, "Please, I don't want to be pregnant," and they would take it, so I didn't have to have the trauma and embarrassment. Um, so you're stronger than I am. You had 4 kids, and I never had any live births. But you could feel it when you're pregnant, and you start getting, sensitivity in your breasts and nipples and stuff, and you start feeling bloated. You just have a
I
feeling, and
felt
there's
all that. That's for sure. I know what it's
yeah,
like to be pregnant, and I had them natural Lamaze. So Angela was natural. Lauren, they had to give me Pitocin she didn't want to come at 9 pounds and 3 ounces. And she went over 2.5 weeks till they finally induced her in Galveston County Hospital, Lauren Michelle Parrish. So Angela Dawn Parrish was a little,
I'm
she
not
was
leaving.
early. She was
So
6 months
anyway,
early.
so
Stephanie
you
was
you
PG.
had you saw the orb. See, I've seen the cigar shaped craft. I used to pull down the orb. See, you sparked the memory in me. We had a place called Neville Island, and the Nevilles were the very rich, powerful family during the War of the Roses. So I think they must have been the descendants of Neville.
Yeah, Neville High School.
And I'm a descendant of Nevilles, the Nevilles that ruled England. That they were the kingmakers. Anyway, so I'm living across from Neville Island, and the orbs like to hover above Neville Island, and they were bright colors, like bright yellow, orange, green, red, and blue. And I didn't know what the pattern was, but they were huge. They were like an oversized harvest moon. They were just gigantic. And I'd say to my friends, "Well, do you want to see a UFO?" And they go, "Okay." So I knew if I went to, so I'd say, "Let's go for a walk." So we would walk up to California Avenue was on the top of Avalon, and then on both sides the streets came down, and the one side went down to the ocean and the railroad tracks. So I lived on the side that went down to not the ocean, the river, Ohio River, and the railroad tracks. And so I'd say, "Well, we're going to go here." And so when we walked down a certain street, and I need to go back there and figure out which one it was. I don't think it was Harrison. I have to literally go back there and trace. But as soon as we start walking down, I said, "Okay, now what do you see?" And there are these giant warps, and they go, "What are they?" I said, "Well, they're UFOs." So I would pull them down, and they would show, and they like to come three at a time. So, but I never knew what the orbs were about. So you're saying, so do you think he left in the orb?
Interdimensionally, I don't know.
You don't know.
Everything's speculation, except when I had
Yeah, that's
years
okay.
later when I was briefed with Tom, and then when they visited me here, my latest vision, which I made YouTubes about with the gentleman that came and saw me, and then the one that was very divine, like traveling through space, and
Hmm.
so there's the higher levels of travelers, I guess one might say, and then those that we divine versus those that are just working or are coming and going, and working with our species here on the planet and getting us in space because we're not getting there fast enough, I think. So to save everybody in the ways that they place them in other places. I I'm a strong believer that they use us in other places, and so that may be different religions, the Latter-day Saints or the Scientology, or there's many world religions that believe different things. But I'm just keeping an open mind. But my open mind tells me that we're not alone in the universe, and that alien civilizations exist, and that they come and go as they please, and they can take on any form, including
Oh,
Bigfoot. They can take that,
right.
or they can be
We're
great.
running out of time. We got like 5 minutes. Let's wrap up. We'll wrap up this show with this episode. So you were in watching James Bond Thunderball, and they took you and kind of corralled you outside to a side exit into an alleyway.
Yeah,
And then so they asked you, take it from there. They asked you if you liked the movie. What happened?
yeah. Well, they told us let's see, what have you got? This is pretty interesting. I like how you listened to me through the years and put it together in these little ways now that we're presenting it. But the reason was to see if we would work for the government. Now, which government, what program? Because I worked in so many areas as a investigator. Basically, we thought of ourselves as investigators, agents, and contractors. But he worked at
You
NASA.
were you were 15, so
I
they
worked for
waited till
TOW.
you graduated, right? They waited till you graduated high school before they took you into their program. But they recruited you. This earlier episode. What year did you graduate?
67 was the year that we got out of school, but I went back to Alvin Junior College and for law enforcement, and then I did
So
criminal justice at
if you were to go to a class reunion,
University
what
of Alabama.
class reunion would you go to from your high school?
Oh, 68. I think 68 are the ones they were upset I didn't come into, but I
You're
don't. I
supposed to
didn't go
graduate
to
in
that one.
'68,
Yeah,
and I was supposed to graduate in '72, but I left because I was getting bullied. But then I went and got my GED, so I graduated in '70. So that's another interesting thing. We both kind of left. We didn't go through that.
yeah. But the program here. Now, what I discovered since I've been researching all of this, which I don't have a name for what I do other than I've been called a ufologist because I follow ufology and technology and alienology. But all the people I worked with were investigators like myself, including Dr. Bruce Maccabee and Don Berliner and Stanton T. Friedman. George Fowler, of course, was Air Force and told me not to forget him. But J. Allen Hynek was the one I met and recruited me into the program, was J. Allen Hynek. So the man that, oh shoot, what's his name? The Air Force gentleman that was at NASA in Houston and was in the Air Force, Schleicher. I think that's his. Was it Carl Schleicher?
Something like that. Yeah, I remember.
Schleicher. Uh, it's the one that confirmed by Dr. Richard Allen Miller that we did some shows with Dr. Richard Allen Miller. He discussed Schleicher and his wife working and trying to work all this out through uh, Stanford Research Institute, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And so she had a story to tell as well. Now, that other lady that you had on, she
Which lady? I've
talked
had
to
thousands of
Dr.
people.
Richard Allen Miller's wife, Leona Miller. She
Yeah, she's
talked about,
with us. Yeah.
that's the woman that you and I know. There was Melinda, but before Melinda, there was another lady. Now, this is Jesse Marcel. Now, I met
Right. We're
him.
not going to cover. This is because we're out of time. This is our preview.
That's a whole show with
We're going
Dr.
to do this. We're not going to get involved with this right now. But I just.
Are you going to get Jesse Marcel Jr. to come on? Because I met his father,
You
his
can try to reach
grandfather.
out for me. We can. He was very, very busy. He's getting more and more famous, and he's working on
I
books.
bet. Yeah, everybody's
So
working on books, y'all. So,
yeah,
well, we've got a lot to cover. And you want to talk to Dr. Stephen Greer, and you said his secretary got back in touch
yeah.
with you.
Let's not talk about that publicly right now. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That was a private conversation. So
Oh,
anyway, just
sorry.
yeah. So I work on books, but I'm working on a cover um, for Stargate. I haven't got that done yet. I'm working on this book
These
right
look
now.
very fantastical fantasy, like Harry Potter's
Yeah,
books or
that's
something.
kind of my life is kind of
Fantastical.
fantastical. My life is Harry Potter. Yeah, it's very Harry Potter.
Fantasy.
This is supposed to be me with my. This is my how I see myself with long red hair. That's,
Yeah, I like red hair too, over
and
blonde. I do.
my hair's growing out, and I don't know what it is, and I keep wanting to go. I go, well, I'm 69. Should I color it again? Or, anyway, so this one I just published.
Heaven
And
and
this
inner earth.
covers through the end of the 50s. And so basically, I'm tracking what happened in the world, what happened to uh, other experiencers, contactees at this time, how they
It's
use
quite a
it, and then
quest.
my personal story. So I have the personal, the interpersonal, the global, the universal. What's going on in the cosmos, and I tie them in this weave. And so, and I keep saying I could do a book a decade, but every time I start going into it, it's like, no. So the 50s ended up being three books. I've just started the 60s, and I think I'm going to have three books.
You know
Uh,
what's funny about dates you've got? Because October, but May 10th, 2017, you asked me about
yeah,
that day. That day is when we met with uh, Andrew Bashago, Dr. Ken R. Johnston Sr., Dr. Sr.,
yeah, mhm,
Tom from Norway, and even Billy Carson of Gaia
right.
TV with Forbidden
We,
Knowledge was there. And
we
all of
read
us
a
met. And that was my date, Janet. Think about it.
your
May
date for.
10th, 2017. I'd had 50 years that day.
Oh my goodness! Wow. See, there's
I'd flown in 87. I was in Washington, D.C. at the wherever Office of Personnel Management had our psychiatric evals and our polygraphs. On May 10th, 1987, I was in Washington, D.C. Think about it. And then 2017. And then May 10th, 67, when I was with the Spinnerets and
mhm.
at NASA and was in the
May 10th
newspaper.
is your day.
It's amazing. They used that date, May 10th, 67, 87, and 2017, to close out all that I did and then to start marketing and public relations with you for the everything we've been doing with extraterrestrials. To me, it's amazing how they do that
So
interdimensionally.
what I would like to have to close is like, if you want to contact me, the best way to contact me is aquarianradio@gmail.com. I don't have that written here. What's the best way for people to contact you, Teresa?
I've got business
No, no, just give me one.
emails, but just TJ Mars ACIR. Our agency is easy to remember. TJ Mars Agency at gmail.com
Okay, so
or
you
TJ
can
Mars
send
at
us
Outlook.
if you have
I did-
anybody that we're going to start doing interview shows again once a week, probably on Fridays, and then Tuesdays we'll do our ongoing story. And so please contact me because I get everything set up. Uh, what is it? Aquarianradio@gmail.com. That's my original. We've done over what 10, 12 years, 13 years of
Yeah,
shows.
since June 3rd, 2012, we
Right.
began all the stuff with ascensioncenter.net, which you still have. And I'm going to be very involved in the evolution of the Ascension movement, which we
Well, we're
started.
going to have to go because I have another appointment. But
Okay.
and we're trying to keep our shows down a little bit
So
around.
now it's easier to load, download on
It's
you.
easy to keep going, but
Well,
we've got
thank
to
you for your thank you for your devotion to this, Janet, to helping all of us
do. So
as
when I hang up here, I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you, everybody.
thank you,
Aloha.
everybody.
Oh, don't hang up. I'm going to end the
DJ
broadcast now.
Morris here.
Don't
Bye
hang up. Don't hang up.
bye.
Don't hang up. Okay, 1 second.